Love talking about e-commerce and building. So I think I've come to the right place.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the new episode of Ecom 365. I'm co-founder and CEO of ShopAgain.io. For this episode, I have a new guest with me. When I reached out to Oren to be a guest in our podcast, first thing I noticed was his tagline: I'm a builder who is paid to grow nine-figure brands. Now that's not something you hear every day. Oren will share with us the stories and insights from 10 years of building brands and products in luxury, CPG, and cannabis. He also runs a newsletter where Oren talks about how to bring products to life. Thanks for joining us, Oren. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Pleasure to be here. Love talking about e-commerce and building. So I think I've come to the right place.
Absolutely. We are happy to have you. Where did your journey start as a brand builder?
So I started as a graphic designer. I was designing, and I was kind of in that lucky part of the early internet where Google ads were first coming about. And so I was working in an agency and they said, hey, does anyone want to help us understand this new thing that's happening with Google ads? And so I dove in there. And then kind of progressed to, when social media came out, running that at the same agency, and then going in-house to different brands, and eventually really focusing on e-commerce and email automation. And then over the course of about 5 or 7 years working in marketing in those brands, I began to notice that I think if you have the marketing toolkit, you should also be really working on building products. So I started to learn supply chain, ordered a lot of products through Alibaba, began putting my own products on there. And then now I've kind of shifted fully from the marketing e-commerce side to the sourcing products, product ideation, making products work. And I do that across a large number of projects. So it's an exciting life, but I try to keep things dynamic and always learn new things.
Absolutely. So you did quite a travel. You started in a completely, somewhat overlap area and moved on to building the brands eventually.
Yeah. I think that's where I look at, I think a lot of entrepreneurs today or e-commerce builders today used to say, hey, you need to be a specialist, you need to be a developer, you need to be a coder. I kind of disagree. I think it's beneficial to be a jack of all trades just because of how easy it is to learn something on the internet now. You can spend a year becoming really, really good at SEO, and then another year becoming really, really good at design or product configuration. And it's not like you need to have spent years and years building these careers anymore. And I think then piecing them all together has just a huge value.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. And especially for, entrepreneurs, for founders, it becomes very important to be comfortable with more than one skill set. They could be great in one skill set, but it just pays off to be good at more things too.
Agreed.
I know you also served as president of Unrivaled Brands. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and so over the last 3 years, I basically was the president of what became a publicly traded cannabis company and brand house. And then over the last month or so have been transitioning out of that role. But over 3 years, we basically looked at this emerging industry. We had a vehicle where we acquired a couple brands in different places and then tried to build them up and succeeded. We ended up bringing those brands across 4 states. And so if you know things about the cannabis market, you know that it's actually every state is very different because they have different laws and regulations, and building brands around that is challenging. But we we ended up being, we did about $60 million in revenue last year, amongst brands and dispensaries. And, we got to craft some really interesting projects. And what was most interesting about that is building brands and selling inside regulated spaces where you don't have the normal toolkit. You say, hey, I can't just run Facebook ads to generate interest for my product. I can't, I'm prohibited from doing these. So we have this different set of things we've worked on. And so I got to refresh, billboards, direct mail, SEO, retail, tactical level marketing, and building brands there. And we had a really interesting time. It's a really interesting industry. And it was my first time I've brought a business onto the public market. So we went onto the OTC markets last July, and that was a big deal for a company that we had started at 70 people that is now about 350. And it's been a really interesting experience and building in an entirely different way versus I'd been primarily kind of more traditional retail and DTC before that.
That kind of took my next question. So growing and growing the Unrivaled brand is very different from a typical DTC brand because I mean you weren't allowed to run ads on most of the social platforms. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that? How what you had to do to still
Yeah.
grow and get the word out there?
Yeah, so we really leaned in on retail support. So in an emerging industry like this, where consumers have lots of questions and they don't quite know what they're looking for, they really lean heavily on retail. And that's almost the opposite end of the spectrum of what we see in the rest of the retail world, right? Where you don't need to ask the Best Buy employee what TV you should buy. You're going to do that research online, right? But in cannabis, you're really going to lean on the person that's in that dispensary telling you, recommending you things, telling you what they like. And so we went very tactical with retail level marketing. And that included, we built a community for our, for sales partners inside dispensaries we work with. We cared a lot about how we distribute assets and social media graphics and things like that to them, about what our promotional presence was like in store, what our point of sale presence merchandising was inside the stores too. And this was its own challenge because it's not like there's huge chains with hundreds of stores and they say you have a 2 foot by 1 foot area and you have power. Every store is different, all these little boutiques. So we had to design many different point of sales. And we actually did some really interesting modular point of sales that allowed us to make it bigger or smaller based on where we went into. But yeah, we really focused on just tactical retail marketing and ensuring that all of the employees were trained, that they love the products, because we knew that would trickle down to the consumers. And that will change at some point as the industry grows. But while it's small right now, that's been the area we focused on, and it's been very successful.
Okay. How was this experience different from growing, a luxury or CPG brand for that matter?
Yeah, I think there are some overlap. I think no matter what industry you're in, if you're in retail, there's opportunity to take a lot of advantage of it. But really, it's the hardest part for me was the intangible. Was that I'm used to being able to say if I spend $20, I'm going to get $55 back, and we have some level of variance, and we can predict that. Whereas this is it's not the same. Your spends aren't trackable in the same way, and so you really have to rely more upon kind of macro level data and decision making, and really trust your team members a lot more to know what they're doing and find new and interesting ways to measure it. And so that was definitely the hardest part, just because I love being able to look at a spreadsheet and say this all makes sense. And if it doesn't, it's a lot more intangible. But that's also where the opportunity is because if you're succeeding in that, it's something that other people, it's hard for others. They might not want to have to go through what you have to do to get there. And that's why I think emerging industries are so interesting for people that are willing to take risks.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Tell me one thing. You are also an experienced, senior marketer. And I understand your expertise is more in the area of 8-9 figures brands and growing them. But based on your experience, what approach do you recommend to a new starting e-commerce store? How do they get their first few thousand customers?
Yeah, and so I think that social media is still the best channel with which to do that today, in my opinion. I've been paying a lot of attention to TikTok recently because currently I spend a lot of time working on sourcing products and helping brands get their supply chain right with their factories, or make sure they have, if they sell one thing, how can they create 4 or 5 other complementary things to sell with it and upsell and cross sell. And so, but I've been noticing more and more of them are just starting off and going right onto TikTok. They're not even spending money on ads, and they're creating lots and lots of content, and they're getting that first 1,000 customers. And so what I recommend to any of these new brands is to do just that. Spend the time making your content, no matter what it is, whether you're selling software or physical goods, put it on social media, especially TikTok is a huge opportunity right now. Get that first 1,000 customers and then survey them. To have as many person-to-person conversations as you can have if you actually have the time to call them or email them and talk about what they want, why they like your product, what drew them to buy it. And then also be using that with, actual email surveys and things like that to get the information of where your brand grows from there. Because I actually think that it's relatively easy right now to get that first 1,000 customers. What's hard is to then say, oh, this thing will work at 10,000 or 100,000 units, and that when you do it, you're not just selling them a thing, you're creating a brand that is going to resonate versus just a purchase transaction. And so people will see that initial success and then not be prepared for what those next stages look like.
Yeah, that brings me to my next question. The point you made is very valid. Getting those initial transactions, getting those initial sales is a completely different tactic, but building a brand and growing a brand and scaling it is something completely different. So Tell me, what are the important aspects of taking a brand from 8-figure to 9-figure, and then how to grow it further from that point?
Yeah. And so we've been in that process there now. And that just comes down to process and people when you're at that size, right? It's are we, does everyone know what they should be doing every day, every week, every month? Is it documented? And, and are we, and do they have enough resources in place to do it? Because if you've gotten to that that 8-figure point, anywhere if you're in the millions and to the tens of millions, you figured out what the core thing of your business is. But scaling it to that next level means that it has to be able to function without any of the management or people that existed to make that existing jump, because of how much larger that jump is. And people have a hard time comprehending that. And so in this last business where we're kind of making that transition here, this year, we've really just been focused on playbooks, on saying all of our retail operations run the same, all of our sales operations run the same. How do we measure that? How does that get filtered up? And it's just really extremely process driven. And I know for a lot of people that sometimes takes the fun or the soul out of some level of business, but it's what you have to do to function at that next level. And the other thing I think people don't consider making that transition is just supply chain, operations planning, and cash flow management, because the amount of inventory you have to hold to be able to make that jump if you're selling something other than software, and the amount of planning you have to have of payment at that scale between vendors and their liquidity. It's a lot of things that people don't realize, but luckily there's experts out there that have done this at many companies. And you do have to, I feel like, change how you hire when you transition that same team that brought you to 7-8 figures is not the same team that takes you to 9 figures. And I've realized that myself, even where I don't think I'm the person to lead 9-figure brands. I think I'm a good person to give a transition from 7 to 8 and 8 to 9, but everyone has to realize where they best fit in the process.
Yeah. That brings a very interesting question to my mind. You said, as you scale and you get to 9-figure and you're growing a 9-figure brand, the important part becomes the processes, the operations and the processes, right? And it's easily possible that the team, the founders, don't have experience or technical know-how of building that processes. Then do you recommend them bringing external experts to help them build those processes?
It depends what person you're like, what your personality type is. If you're not a detail-oriented founder, then definitely. And if you're more idea driven, but if you have if for people that are more process driven, more data driven, and who are experienced kind of building, mechanisms and frameworks for their business, I think it's worth taking the time to learn. I think one of the nice parts about the modern technology we have is that we built a lot of the processes inside the brands we do inside Coda, which is just like Notion or some of these other more spreadsheet and docs based tools, where you can make documentation, formulas, processes, and inside of software that almost anyone can understand. And so I think it's growing easier. And if you have that personality type that can engage there, then I think you should handle it yourself, because you're going to care more about your business than anybody else. But if you say, hey, I'm better at, I'm an engineer who became a leader of a company, or a salesperson that became a leader of a company, or I want to focus more on ideas or fundraising or relationships, then bring in the experts and don't be afraid to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense, especially, if founders are able to, it helps when they are the ones setting up the process, because they understand the product in most cases better than others, right? They are the one who bring it to life. They are the ones who thought about it, the vision about it.
Completely.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Oren. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
Finally, to our viewers, if you have any questions about e-commerce, paid acquisition, marketing, retention, or development, email us at ecom365@shopagain.io, and we will have them answered by an expert in the future episode. This episode was sponsored by ShopAgain.io, an AI-powered customer retention platform. Thank you for joining us.